Hi, everyone. Welcome back to English Podcast Voice. I'm Quinn.
And I'm Riley.
We are diving deep today into a feeling that is, I think, absolutely universal. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're trying to master a new skill, learn English, navigate a complex relationship, or honestly just get out of bed on a Tuesday morning.
Yeah.
I'm talking about that heavy, frustrating sense of being totally, completely stuck.
It's that feeling that everything around you is moving, but you're not. It's like the engine is running, but the tires are just spinning in the mud. And that struggle is something our sources today really highlight as a critical moment, a decision
Yeah.
point.
It is so, so relatable. I was reading one of the notes and someone described it perfectly. They said they felt like they were doing all the right things, stable job, decent salary, friendly team, but they still felt profoundly off course.
Hmm.
They said it felt like walking through a massive, confusing maze, and it seemed like everyone else had maps, but they had absolutely nothing to guide them.
Wow. That image of walking without a map is such a powerful metaphor for disorientation. And our sources, especially the ones from psychology and existential thought, they suggest that this uncomfortable feeling of being stalled, of lacking direction, it's actually a crucial wake-up call.
It's a signal.
It's a huge signal. It's the sign that your current approach has hit a wall and it's demanding, well, psychological flexibility.
Exactly. So our mission today is a little ambitious. We are going to act as your guides, and we're pulling critical insights from incredibly diverse places. Long-term psychotherapy strategies, some heady existential philosophy, and practical mindfulness techniques.
Right.
We want to arm you, the listener, with the precise vocabulary to understand and hopefully overcome this state.
And we've got some really essential terms that will help you communicate this internal conflict. We're going to deeply unpack complex ideas like impasse, which describes that specific stuckness in relationships or goals,
All right.
and authenticity, which is all about how we define our true selves in the face of pressure, and then defilements, which are the insidious internal enemies of our progress.
And here's the teaser for you. We're going to end the deep dive by revealing a surprising and maybe a little scary philosophical idea. We'll look at the idea that accepting the absurdity of life, the fact that the universe has no inherent meaning planned out for you, is actually the starting point for true freedom.
Ooh,
We'll challenge you with that in our pop quiz at the very end.
that's a payoff worth waiting for sure.
But first, you know the drill. Please make sure you subscribe to English Podcast Voice right now and give this deep dive a like. It really helps us keep creating these detailed analyses of these, well, fascinating topics.
Let's start with where that feeling of being stuck is often clinically identified. It's in long-term goals and sustained relationships, especially in therapeutic settings. Our sources discuss psychotherapy that spans months or even years. This kind of approach isn't for, quick fixes. It's typically reserved for complex, deeply entrenched issues like personality disorders, chronic physical illness, or just fundamental personal growth.
That makes sense. I mean, deep change takes time. You're essentially retraining a lifetime of habits. But what happens when that whole process just stalls?
Well, over time, especially in long relationships, both the client and the therapist can run into something called a therapeutic impasse. And this is a target vocabulary term we absolutely have to master today.
Okay, let's unpack this immediately. We hear the word stuckness, but what specifically defines an impasse in this clinical context? Is it just when the client, stops showing up?
No, it's actually far more subtle and maybe more dangerous than that. An impasse is a very specific kind of rupture or breakdown within the ongoing process.
So you're still going, but it's broken.
You're still going.
Yeah?
The therapeutic work loses its meaning or its goal direction. There's a noticeable lack of fundamental change. And crucially, the sessions might. They might devolve into merely reviewing the events of the last week, what one source calls going on autopilot.
So it's not just slow progress. It's a meaningless, comfortable repetition. That almost sounds worse than being openly hostile.
It is often worse because that comfort, it breeds complacency. The source gave a really powerful case example of a client named Colin.
Okay.
Colin was recovering from depression and substance abuse, and he had rapid, genuine progress at the beginning. He stopped using substances, for instance. But once his primary symptoms were gone, the therapy just hit a plateau.
What did that plateau look like in practice? Did they just stop talking about the big issues?
That's pretty much it. The session stopped focusing on the deep, underlying psychological patterns that had caused the depression in the first place. Instead, they started revolving around recent, sort of unhelpful events, or worse, just comfortable shared interests.
So they were friends, not not therapist and client.
They were essentially avoiding the hard work. They were reviewing rather than working toward transformation.
Wait, I have a question about the dynamic here. How does a therapist even bring up the idea that the relationship itself has reached a deadlock? I mean, without the client feeling attacked or creating immediate resistance, that seems incredibly difficult.
That's where the therapist's skill is really tested.
Mm,
They have to observe the pattern of repetition, the avoidance, the lack of emotional depth in the sessions. In Colin's case, the real danger was complacency.
right.
Both Colin and the therapist became satisfied with the current comfort level. They were reluctant to push for deeper, harder change that would bring about, discomfort. The source even noted that Colin rejected the idea of seeing another therapist, saying it would mean starting all over again and having to tell my story.
Wow. That avoidance is the key insight, isn't it? He wanted to stay in the familiar, even if it was stagnant. The therapeutic impasse mirrored a life impasse.
Absolutely. The source connected that rejection to his desire to stay in a codependent, stuck relationship with his girlfriend. His refusal to start over in therapy mirrored his resistance to push past the comfort zone in his life. That avoidance, that resistance, is the functional definition of the therapeutic deadlock, the impasse.
That makes the concept so clear. Okay, if we want to use this word in everyday English, we need a solid, clear definition. Give me the spotlight definition of impasse.
Okay, the word impasse, it's spelled I-M-P-A-S-S-E. It means a situation where no progress is possible. It's a deadlock or a complete standstill. It often implies a disagreement or some kind of obstruction that prevents any further action.
Got it. A complete stop in development. Now, to help our listeners really commit this to memory, give us 3 distinct examples. One formal, one casual, and one that's a bit funny or weird.
Certainly. First, a formal example. You'll hear this a lot in politics or business. Despite weeks of intense debate, the international delegates reached a diplomatic impasse over the new trade policy, and the talks collapsed.
Very high stakes.
Second, a casual daily example. My roommates and I hit an impasse deciding on a movie. One wanted horror, the other wanted comedy, and since neither would compromise, we ended up watching nothing.
That is the most common kind of impasse in human history, I think.
And finally, a funny one. The dog and the human reached a total impasse over putting on the winter coat. The dog refused to cooperate, and the human was just too tired to try another strategy.
A battle of wills. I love it. Okay, let's try a quick scenario role play to hear it in a real conversation. Let's say we're trying to finalize the structure for our next big project.
Sounds good. I'll be the one insisting on a rigid traditional approach.
And I'll be the person arguing for complete chaos and innovation. Okay, I'm ready. Look, I'm telling you, we should record the next deep dive live, entirely in a treehouse wearing historical costumes. It's innovative.
That is wildly impractical. Our budget only allows for the studio. We have a fundamental disagreement on the practical scope of this project. We have clearly reached an impasse.
Well, why don't we just compromise and record in the studio while wearing historical costumes?
That's still avoiding the core problem. We're stuck because we have conflicting visions. We have to break this impasse by redefining our marketing goals first.
That illustrates the problem so well. When you're stuck, you need to break the impasse. Now, what about the words that often pair with this? What are the collocations?
That leads us right to them. The most frequent pairings are reach an impasse, which means to arrive at the deadlock. Then there's break the impasse, which is to solve or resolve it. And of course, as in our source, a therapeutic impasse.
So if you're stuck, you've reached an impasse. But the real question is how we move forward. How do we break it in practice? That leads us straight into our next section, building momentum.
So the clinical source provides 5 trans-theoretical principles specifically designed to move clients past that uncomfortable impasse. And these aren't just, therapeutic jargon. They are blueprints for psychological flexibility and creativity in any area of life.
Psychological flexibility, that's the exact opposite of that rigid feeling of being on autopilot that defines the impasse. Okay, I want to hear these in detail.
All right, let's dedicate some serious time to these because they contain the real actionable insights. Number 1, planful spontaneity. As you noticed earlier, that sounds like a contradiction. How can you prepare to be spontaneous?
It is a total paradox. It sounds like the secret to great improv comedy. You have rules, but you have to be totally flexible inside those rules.
That's a great way to put it. The core idea is that the guide, whether it's the therapist, a mentor, or even just you guiding yourself, maintains an overarching plan or goal, but must remain radically flexible and open enough to incorporate recent spontaneous events into that plan.
So you're preparing your attitude to be adaptive, not preparing a rigid script.
Exactly. It's all about attitude.
I think this is so vital. If I'm learning English, my goal is fluency. That's the plan. But if I suddenly meet a native speaker at a coffee shop, I need the flexibility to abandon my planned study session and engage in that spontaneous, real-world practice. That's planful spontaneity.
That's a perfect application. The therapist models this openness, showing the client how to adapt to the inherent uncertainties of life. The source mentioned the case of Angela. Angela struggled with self-defeating patterns and would often come into a session unsure what to focus on.
Okay.
Instead of the therapist constantly giving her direction, they used planful spontaneity to help Angela learn to take the lead in real time.
How did that work? How did that break her pattern?
By saying essentially, look, I came in with 3 things we could discuss, but since you brought up this incident from yesterday, let's discard my plan for a moment and focus on how you spontaneously reacted and what that tells us. This helped Angela take ownership of the session, which reduced her dependence and eventually her self-defeating thoughts.
Wow.
It was all about adapting the plan to the moment.
That's so powerful. It teaches self-reliance. Okay, what's principle 2?
Principle number 2 is habitual creativity. Now, if any long-term endeavor, whether it's therapy, writing a novel, or running a business, goes on for a long time, there's a massive risk of tedium,
Yeah.
boredom. This principle says you need to cultivate a consistent habit of creative thinking, not just to solve problems, but to generate new alternatives and keep the process feeling fresh.
So creativity isn't a one-time thing, like a lightning bolt of genius. It's a muscle you have to use daily. How does a person cultivate a habit of creativity? That sounds really difficult.
It often involves reframing traditional tasks. The source provides the example of Maria, a busy mother and artist during the COVID-19 pandemic. She needed to improve her health, but faced significant practical and psychological obstacles to exercising outdoors.
Right, so the impasse here is the reality of her life versus her health goals, a classic stuck situation.
Precisely. To overcome this, her therapy focused on generating alternatives. She creatively identified ways to improve her health at home, like doing indoor nature walks, using online videos to avoid the cold and the infection risk. She committed to the habit of creativity in finding solutions.
So it turned the problem of I can't go outside into the creative challenge of how can I bring the outside in?
Exactly. And that ensures client commitment, because they designed the solution themselves. The therapist highlighted how this gave Maria this profound sense of empowerment and ownership over her health goals.
That's great. Okay, principle 3.
Moving to principle number 3, guided discovery. This relies heavily on the Socratic method, using open-ended questions to help the client test their own deeply held, often negative, beliefs. The guide facilitates, but the client must discover the truth for themselves through observation.
I love this because it respects the person's intelligence. Instead of telling someone, your assumption about yourself is wrong, you ask them a question that forces them to test that assumption against reality.
That's the core idea. The source provides excellent examples of these guiding questions. Questions like, what parts of this specific situation am I actually responsible for? Or, even more challenging, how do these negative events definitively prove that I failed as a person?
Oh, that second question is brilliant. It forces the client to find the proof for their catastrophic thoughts, which usually doesn't exist.
Right. And look at the case of Amanda. She entered therapy with heavy self-judgment, often assuming responsibility for completely external factors, like her abrasive boss's flaws or her partner's bad mood.
She carried the weight of the world.
She did. And guided discovery helped her engage in genuine self-exploration. By testing her hypothesis against evidence, she eventually realized the limited scope of her actual responsibility in these situations.
That sounds like true liberation, the knowledge that you don't have to carry the burdens that aren't yours. It breaks the impasse of self-blame.
Okay, principle number 4 focuses on specificity and broad goals. In long-term therapy, goals tend to be broad, or what the source calls transdiagnostic, meaning they cut across specific disorders, focusing on fundamental processes rather than just a single symptom.
Wait, if the goals are broad, why do you need to be specific about them? Isn't that another paradox?
It's a critical distinction, because if the broad goal is just to feel better, the client and therapist will inevitably lose direction and hit an impasse. That vagueness leads to stagnation. By defining core underlying themes, the work stays laser-focused.
Can you give us a concrete case where that specificity was applied?
Absolutely. The source used the example of Alex. Alex presented with 5 separate, highly problematic issues: spending impulsively, bouts of anger, alcohol abuse, compulsive sexual activity, and recurring suicidal thoughts.
Whoa. That's a lot to tackle.
A lot. And if the therapist treated each of those as 5 separate problems, the work would be overwhelming and directionless.
It would be impossible to gain momentum. So what was the specific broad goal?
The therapist identified that all 5 problems stem from one core transdiagnostic theme: impulse control. So the specific broad goal became develop an enhanced moment-to-moment awareness of emotional reactions and the subsequent impulse to act. This gave the work direction. It linked all the disparate problems together under one clear, manageable objective.
That brings immediate clarity to the maze. It's about identifying the root, not just pruning the leaves. Okay, what's the last one?
Finally, principle number 5, which ties everything back to the relationship, is pushing the limits of the therapeutic alliance. This is where the therapist demonstrates genuineness and realism, encouraging the client to experiment with new ways of experiencing and interacting with others.
Genuineness.
The therapist has to be prepared to show their own humanity and take risks in the relationship to model genuine behavior.
That focus on genuineness feels absolutely crucial. It seems like the core idea here is that psychological flexibility breaking the impasse requires confronting your life and creating yourself through conscious choice. And that, of course, takes us directly into existential philosophy, specifically the challenge of living life authentically.
It connects perfectly. When we talk about genuineness, self-creation, and taking responsibility for choice, we step into the dense territory of Jean-Paul Sartre, who famously declared, "Existence precedes essence."
Okay, that is a deep philosophical concept, and it's critical for our deep dive. What does existence precedes essence mean in plain English for our listeners?
It's the ultimate statement of freedom. It means you are born into the world. You exist as a free, undefined being. You are, at the start, nothing more than the sum of your future possibilities. Your choices and actions are what define who you are, your essence afterward.
There's no destiny.
No destiny, no predefined nature, no fixed identity. You are defined only by what you do.
So if I spend years choosing to be a thoughtful, dedicated language learner, I become a thoughtful, dedicated language learner. I wasn't destined to be one, I chose it.
Precisely. And living an authentic existence means constantly being responsible for creating yourself through those actions, making conscious, difficult choices. If you're not living authentically, you're letting external labels, social roles, or some predetermined excuse define you. You're refusing to choose.
That's why we need to master the language around this. Okay, give us the definition that captures the philosophical weight of authenticity, going beyond simply being honest.
Authenticity. It's spelled Authenticity, is the state of living a life true to one's radical freedom and self-created values, without conforming to the roles, expectations, or definitions imposed by external pressures or other people.
That definition captures the necessary depth. Okay, let's practice with 3 examples to ensure our listeners really internalize that philosophical weight.
First, a formal, public example.
Yeah.
The CEO demonstrated profound authenticity by publicly acknowledging the company's past failures and explaining the painful restructuring plan with brutal, unvarnished honesty.
Transparency, even when it's painful, is a sign of authenticity.
Second, a casual personal example. I started feeling genuinely more authentic after I stopped chasing social media trends and focused instead on sharing the quiet, less popular hobbies I truly enjoyed.
Rejecting the external pressure, focusing on the internal value, I get that.
And the funny/weird one. The young wizard who was expected to save the world realized his true authentic calling was actually being a quiet, moderately paid accountant because he genuinely loved ledgers and taxes.
I love that. Sometimes authenticity is just embracing the quiet life. Let's try a quick scenario role play, where a colleague is discussing burnout.
Okay, you can start.
You seem totally exhausted lately. Are you really happy managing this department? You always talked about wanting to travel the world and write poetry.
I know, but I can't quit. My parents, my mortgage, my whole life is structured around this job. If I quit, I wouldn't know who I am. I'd be nothing.
Maybe that's the problem. You're refusing to live an authentic existence. You're letting the role of manager define you, instead of taking responsibility for choosing what you truly value and acting on it.
Wow, that felt like a philosophical punch to the gut. You're right. I'm scared to define myself outside of this pre-assigned role.
And that refusal to choose is central to the next section. Before we get there, what are the collocations for authentic?
Right. We use terms like authentic existence. We talk about a lack of authenticity or being inauthentic. And most commonly today, the search for authenticity.
Fantastic. Now that we know what authenticity is, we need to understand its primary enemy, both internally and externally.
The enemy of authenticity, according to Sartre, is something he called mauvaise foi, which translates directly as bad faith.
So the inauthentic life is a life lived in bad faith. How does this denial of freedom actually manifest itself in everyday choices?
Bad faith is essentially self-deception. It's the attempt to impose a fixed essence onto yourself before you act, specifically to avoid the overwhelming responsibility of your own freedom. You tell yourself a lie to feel safe.
Can you give us a really clear, modern example of someone acting in bad faith?
Sure. Think about a person who is constantly cruel to service workers or their subordinates. When they get challenged, they excuse themselves by saying, well, I have to be cruel, that's just my competitive nature, or it's my genetics, my whole family is short-tempered.
Ah, so they're shifting responsibility away from the choice they made in that moment.
Precisely. They are denying their radical freedom to choose otherwise. Sartre argues that once you act cruelly, you are then defined as a cruel person by that action, and you have to be accountable for that new definition. Blaming genetics or human nature or social roles is a lie. It's bad faith.
Because they could always choose to act differently and start building a new essence.
Exactly. It's an avoidance of self-creation. And bad faith is deeply connected to how we perceive others perceiving us. This brings us to a concept called the look of the other.
Okay, this sounds like a very dense philosophical idea. How does being seen by another person restrict my freedom and push me toward inauthenticity?
The look of the other relates to how being seen by another person tends to objectify us. When someone looks at you, you suddenly stop experiencing yourself as a free subject defining your own world, and you start experiencing yourself as an object in their world, categorized and defined by them.
That's a huge shift in perspective. You lose your subjectivity.
The moment you feel the look, you are aware of yourself as having a specific identity: funny, boring, smart, nervous. Sartre's famous example illustrates this perfectly. The man looking through the keyhole.
Walk us through that story one more time, but in detail, because it's so important to the concept.
Okay, imagine a man secretly watching someone through a keyhole. He is fully absorbed in the act. His consciousness is purely directed outwards at the scene he's observing. He isn't thinking about himself at all. He's a pure subject. Then, suddenly, he hears a floorboard creak behind him.
Ah.
He realizes he is being watched. He is caught.
The moment he's caught, the look of the other has landed on him.
Yes. And he feels instant shame because he is suddenly objectified, defined by the look of the other as a peeping Tom. He moves from being a free, unbounded subject to being a defined, categorized object.
And if we allow that Beller, that external definition, to permanently dictate our actions and limit our freedom, that is another path into inauthenticity and bad faith. We let others' views dictate our essence.
And that denial of freedom, that internal obstacle, connects perfectly to the inner mental obstacles found in our mindfulness source. The philosophical internal obstacle is bad faith. The mindfulness internal obstacle is the defilement.
That brings us to our second source, which talks about mental purification. In meditation and spiritual texts, the equivalent of that inner selfish motivation that prevents clarity is called a defilement or kilesa.
Yes. The core defilements are the famous triad: greed, lobha, hatred, dosa, and delusion, moha. But the source emphasizes that defilements are not just those gross, obvious problems. They include, and I'm quoting here, all their friends and relatives, even the very distant ones.
Okay, I need to really understand these distant relatives. What subtle, everyday thoughts that feel normal are actually considered defilements?
Any thought or feeling rooted even slightly in that basic triad. The source gives a fantastic list. Think about judgment of others. He is so inefficient, I could do that so much better. Irritation, this slow line is ruining my day. Or self-criticism, I am hopeless at this new skill. Even excitement about success can be one. Like, wow, that was a wonderful meditation session. I must replicate this exact experience tomorrow. Or even subtle aversion to sensory input, like, ugh, I hate the smell of this coffee.
So judging myself, judging others, wanting things to be different than they are, all of that is a defilement. It's astonishing how subtle these impurities are.
That's right. And that's why you need to watch your attitude toward the experience. The crucial principle here is that the object of your attention is not important. It doesn't matter if you're watching your breath, listening to a sound, or observing an emotion. What matters is the observing mind and its attitude.
Wait, let's slow down here. Why does the attitude matter more than the object?
Because the object is just the reality of the moment. The attitude is where the defilement resides. If you are trying to force yourself to concentrate really hard to have a good experience, that aggressive forcing itself is a defilement because it comes from greed, lobha, the desire for a specific result.
So, trying to create a positive experience is greed, and rejecting pain or difficulty is aversion. dosa. And both of those tire you out and hinder genuine learning and practice.
Precisely. They prevent the mind from gaining clarity and flexibility. The meditation source used a memorable visual, illustrations of three rats labeled moha, lopa, and dosa, showing them lurking everywhere, even perched innocently on the meditator's shoulder or head.
That's a great image.
They represent the core problems plaguing the mind, constantly injecting that subtle impurity.
That makes the task huge, but also very clear. To break the impasse, we have to look inward and clean up our attitude. Okay, let's focus on the language. Defilements. It sounds a little antique or religious. What is the clear, modern English definition for this deep word?
Defilement, that's D-E-F-I-L-E-M-E-N-T. In this context refers to a mental impurity or an unwholesome quality that clouds the mind and prevents clear understanding. It's anything rooted in greed, hatred, or delusion, even subtle things like arrogance, jealousy, dissatisfaction, or craving.
A clear term for mental impurity. We need 3 examples.
Formally, the spiritual goal is to transcend all mental defilements to achieve profound spiritual clarity and insight.
Classic use in spiritual philosophy.
Casually, I realized my subtle feeling of irritation toward my teammates' slow pace was a minor defilement rooted in impatience and subtle pride.
That's incredibly relatable, identifying impatience as the impurity.
And a funny, weird one. He confessed to a brief, selfish defilement when he saw his rival get a promotion, rooted in pure, irrational jealousy.
We've all had those moments of selfish inner defilement. Let's practice using it in a skit about observing thoughts. I was trying to study English yesterday, and I kept having these recurring mean-spirited thoughts about how much better my friend is at grammar than I am.
That sounds frustrating. Did you engage with the comparison? Did you let it define your feeling?
At first, yes, but then I tried to apply to source material. I realized that comparison and jealousy are both forms of mental defilement. I just tried to watch the thought without assigning any truth to it.
That clicks. That comparison thought is the impurity, the relative, of hatred and dissatisfaction. You successfully observe the defilement, rather than identifying with it and letting it fuel bad faith. That's psychological flexibility in action.
Okay, what are the connotations?
Some strong ones are mental defilements, being fueled by defilement, meaning you're acting because of unchecked greed or anger, and the ultimate goal, which is to eradicate defilements.
That is incredibly useful language for understanding our inner obstacles. So once we recognize the defilements and overcome the impasse, what do we need to keep the progress going?
We need momentum. This is the key to sustain progress in any continuous effort, whether we are talking about meditation practice, therapeutic growth, or maintaining a language learning schedule.
We use this word a lot in physics and sports, right? Referring to mass times velocity. How does that translate metaphorically to mental or psychological practice?
Momentum in practice means that when you maintain continuous effort, the perseverance of right effort, your mind naturally gains a positive force that sustains itself. It's about consistency, not just brute force concentration. When mindfulness is continuous, the mind becomes stronger, more receptive, and requires less effort to continue.
So the continuous, consistent effort builds the psychological equivalent of speed and mass. The hardest part is the start.
That is the nature of momentum. It takes energy to initiate, but once it's established, the force sustains itself and carries you forward. And the source emphasizes a crucial point. The effort must be relaxed and alert.
Why relaxed? If I want momentum, shouldn't I be pushing harder?
Because forcing concentration, which, as we discussed, comes from the defilement of greed or aversion, tires you out and hinders learning. It creates resistance. But simply reminding yourself to be aware consistently, that relaxed, continuous effort allows mindfulness to gain this powerful momentum naturally.
It's like sailing. You don't fight the wind, you adjust the sails.
That's a great analogy.
Once that momentum starts, it feels easier to keep going. It moves from being a forced habit to a natural flow.
Exactly. We have to apply this to the vocabulary. Momentum. How is this typically used in conversation, especially when talking about goals, habits, or careers?
It's used almost exactly like the physical definition, but metaphorically for progress. Give us a spotlight definition.
Momentum. M-O-M-E-N-T-U-M is the energy or force that keeps something moving forward once it has started. It is commonly used to describe psychological habits, professional careers, physical routines, or social and political progress.
Great. 3 distinct examples for our listeners.
Formally, after the new public health bill finally passed the Senate, the social reform movement quickly gained political momentum, pushing for broader related changes across the country.
That sounds like an unstoppable political force.
Casually, It's always extremely hard to start working out after a break, but once I get past the first 2 weeks, I have great momentum, and the healthy habit becomes automatic.
The power of habit overcoming the impasse of starting.
And the funny weird one. I gained so much shopping momentum during the online sale that I accidentally bought a strange, unnecessary statue of a porcelain cat simply because I couldn't stop clicking.
The unstoppable force of consumerism reaching critical momentum. Let's hear it in a short skit about studying. I feel terrible. I took a week off studying for my English exam because I was sick, and now I've completely lost my study momentum. I can't seem to get back into the routine, even though I feel better now.
That's a classic impasse. You need to go back to the basic steps. Don't worry about intensity. Just do 15 minutes of vocabulary review today. You need to build the momentum back slowly by focusing on consistency.
You're right. Even a small task can start the chain reaction. I just need to get the wheel turning again.
Precisely. And common collocations are very strong here. Gain momentum, lose momentum, build momentum, and the goal, which is to keep the momentum going.
Speaking of keeping the momentum going in a practical context, our final source focuses on exactly how to apply this idea of flexibility and avoiding an impasse to practical language learning environments. It provides some fantastic discussion techniques.
This is a perfect link back to our audience. The goal of these activities is always to maximize participation and deep critical thinking, breaking that silent student impasse.
One of the activities detailed is the silent discussion activity. This directly addresses the common problem in language classes where students are often afraid to speak aloud immediately.
I think this strategy is brilliant because it forces cognitive processing before linguistic output. The teacher prepares discussion questions. For example, how can a person maintain hope in the face of deep, recurring adversity?
That's a heavy, authentic question.
It is. And the students then write their answers down first, often moving around the room to read other students' written responses and add their own thoughts. They're processing the deep conceptual meaning without the stress of performing the language perfectly.
So you process the information, form your own opinion, and even see other viewpoints in writing before you ever have to open your mouth to speak. That sounds like a massive confidence builder.
It provides immense benefits. When you finally move to the open discussion, students are ready to speak because they've already processed the information, formulated arguments, and absorbed their classmates' thoughts. It ensures greater participation and deeper discussion.
It overcomes that initial linguistic fear and pressure, which is a major learning impasse. They are prepared for an authentic discussion.
The second set of activities mentioned are ethical dilemmas and what-if discussions. These maximize critical thinking and fluency practice in a challenging, highly engaging context because there's no clear right or wrong answer. They force the students to choose and defend their own essence.
These are the tough choices scenarios that mirror the philosophical demands of authenticity. What are some of the source examples?
The ethical dilemma examples involve real moral conflicts. For example, should you report a friend for stealing a small amount from a store to protect them from a worse future? Or should you stay silent to protect your friendship? The what-if discussions are equally challenging. They require students to imagine big hypothetical changes and defend their approach. For example, what if all forms of transportation suddenly disappeared everywhere in the world?
The beauty of these activities is that they force students to articulate why they value certain outcomes, using precise language to defend their reasoning. It forces them to exercise the psychological flexibility we discussed and builds powerful language fluency.
Exactly. It connects the goal of moving past a linguistic impasse to the life skill of weighing different viewpoints and making hard, conscious choices, just like we discussed with the therapeutic process and existentialism.
This has been a heavy but deeply useful vocabulary haul. So let's move to our common mistake segment. This is where I ask a question that might sound perfectly logical to an English learner, but is totally unnatural to a native speaker.
I'm ready. Lay it on me.
Okay. We spent so much time discussing the deep philosophical weight of the word authenticity today. If I want to say I have a real, serious, and deeply honest conversation with my friend about a major problem, can I say, we had an authenticity to authenticity talk?
That's a fascinating attempt to translate the depth of the concept, and I totally understand the intent. You're trying to convey genuine, deep honesty between two people. However, authenticity to authenticity is not an established idiom and would sound extremely awkward, forced, or incorrect to native speakers.
Okay, so it's a no-go. If I want to communicate a deep, serious sharing of self, what is the natural, established idiom I should use instead?
The common established idiom for a deep, honest, and often serious conversation, which was also mentioned in our source material, is a heart-to-heart.
A heart-to-heart, I see. It focuses on the internal emotional organ as the metaphor for genuine connection.
That's right. It implies intimacy, seriousness, and deep sharing. For example, you would say, "We had a serious heart-to-heart about how unhappy I was with my career path." Or, "After our long argument, we sat down and had a proper heart-to-heart to repair the damage and rebuild trust."
Much cleaner, much more natural. I will absolutely stick to heart from now on. That is a great correction.
Excellent. Now, it's time for the pop quiz. This is where we check if you and our listeners really internalize today's 4 critical vocabulary words and the philosophical teaser we promised.
I'm ready. Test my progress and see if I broke my learning impasse.
Question 1. What is the term for a situation where no progress is possible, often describing a deadlock in negotiations or a psychological stall?
That is an impasse.
Correct. Question 2. What existential term describes this state of living true to one's self-created values, rejecting fixed social roles or bad faith?
That is authenticity.
Perfect. Question 3. In mindfulness practice, what is the term for a mental impurity or unwholesome quality, including subtle aversion, judgment, or greed that prevents clarity?
Those are the defilements. We learned that watching our attitude toward them is the key.
Spot on. And question 4. What is the term for the energy or force that keeps positive habits moving forward once they have started, often gained through continuous perseverance rather than forced concentration?
That is momentum.
Fantastic work. You achieved a definite breakthrough. Now, for the philosophical question we teased at the start, related to the concept of feeling off course in life. What classic philosophical term describes the fundamental feeling of meaninglessness? The idea that the world has no inherent structure or purpose, which existentialists say is actually the necessary starting point for human freedom.
I remember this from the source material, the discussion of Albert Camus, and the realization that life isn't inherently structured. That term is the absurdity, or the absurd.
Exactly right. That perception of the world's fundamental lack of inherent meaning is the absurd.
That leads us to our summary and final thought. Today, we mastered 4 really difficult yet essential words. Impasse, the deadlock. Authenticity, creating your true self through conscious action. Defilements, the inner impurities that distract us, and momentum, the energy of perseverance.
The ultimate takeaway from all these sources, the therapy, the philosophy, the mindfulness, is this. The path to getting unstuck isn't about finding a pre-written map that someone else handed you. The final challenge is accepting the world's fundamental absurdity, that there is no grand meaning or essence given to you.
Wow.
And this acceptance, surprisingly, is what frees you to define and create your own meaning through action, forcing you to live authentically, regardless of how terrifying or difficult that choice is.
That is a massive thought to end on. You are responsible for designing your own map.
You are, and that is both terrifying and exhilarating.
Our micro-challenge for you, our listener, this week is simple. Use one of these 4 major vocabulary words, impasse, authenticity, defilement, or momentum, in a conversation or journal entry this week. Apply the language to your own life.
That's how you build true mastery and keep your momentum going.
And don't forget to like and subscribe to English Podcast Voice.
I'm Riley. Bye.
I'm Quinn. See you next time.